As we near 50,000 subs, big changes are coming to the channel. Changes I think all of my friends and fans will be excited about. 50,000 subs will mark a reveal of many changes in our branding, presentation, scheduling, and etc. It will also come with a special episode of Death of a Game. In an effort to expand my horizons as a pseudo-journalist, I want to branch out more to speaking on more current issues in our world of gaming today. Microtransactions is where we start. And the story of microtransactions isn't one that I've quite seen told before. Yes, people are generally aware of the term and sure people can mention X game and its pay-to-win mechanics. But rarely do people actually quantify what qualifies as a microtransaction or poor use of such, and then in turn, what constitutes paying to win. The story behind microtransactions goes past just that though. It's a look at the mind of investors, publishers, game developers, and most troubling, into the very psyche of a consumer. Concepts such as free-to-play or microtransactions can be met with quite fierce opposition, and yet many people don't understand the business model and why it has continued to be quite prevalent in today's market.
Delicious.
Shadow of War is probably the most recent high-profile offender, a single-player game that sells you loot boxes with gears and weapons, and XP boosts as well. But such business models have existed for over a decade, which left me confused as to the seemingly only recent hoopla about it all. There are an awful lot of blurred lines and gray areas in the story of microtransactions. So, let me elucidate for you. In this video, we will talk about things like free-to-play, microtransactions, freemium, mobile gaming, and single-player microtransactions, starting with how these models rose to prominence and breaking down why they are even successful in the first place.
Action!
It's important to start from the beginning of it all, which funnily enough starts with arcades, the sadly dying, but charm-filled out vessel of gaming. Yes, arcades were and still are considered microtransactional style games. For a few quarters, you pay for a try at the game, often only a single life. And when you die, well, it's time to shovel out some more quarters. Even the arcade warriors come to the battlefield armed with stacks of quarters. That's because the nature of games in the arcade is that you have to spend multiple quarters to win the game.
Thank you, my turtle.
This could be in the way the levels are designed, in the sense where you feel like the basic level NPCs are easy enough to kill, but stack enough of them, and you start to take damage and possibly even lose your life. Fork over a quarter. Get to the boss and get him really low. Damn, time to fork over another quarter. Rinse and repeat for a couple of levels, and what started as a 25 to 50 cent affair quickly becomes a couple of dollars, and that's only on a single machine. Establishments like Full Tilt, Dave & Buster's, and Main Event prey upon the idea you won't resist to buy preloaded cards to play in the arcades.
I didn't think you could make it this far.
And when they sell you on the premium extra token package, you spend that much more money. Oh, and arcades in this age as well have freaking restaurants and bars in them. They are the ultimate microtransaction heaven. Needless to say, they're desired for you to spend money, but not necessarily in a large amount. Say a standard game price could be $60, but in smaller intervals called microtransactions. So it's almost like you're getting multiple of a gaming experience, but just in a more condensed manner, which usually involves some sort of social interaction as well. So why don't people complain about arcades? Well, because you know what you're getting into. You can see the quarter price on the face of the arcade station, and you know from watching others play that when you die, you've got to pay some more quarters. People start to dislike microtransactions when they feel forced upon them, and most importantly, seemingly against their own wills. Now, before everyone pulls out their pitchforks and talks about mind control, the story of microtransactions is a multifaceted one. You have things like season passes, day one DLC, and loot boxes. And those are certainly the more controversial aspects. But it really all starts with MMOs and their free-to-play models. Free-to-play games with microtransactions in the form of an MMO were largely invented by Nexon, a popular Asian publisher of MMO titles, because they were at the point of removing one of their failing MMOs. As an experiment, The team decided to give away the game, which was titled Quiz Quiz, for free, and sell a few cosmetic and in-game items as a sort of test. This was back in the early 1990s. When their revenue increased 16% over that same year, they obviously realized they were onto something. Lee Seng-chon, feel free to laugh at my pronunciation, the creator of Quiz Quiz, would later go on to create MapleStory, one of the most popular MMOs of all time, and one of the highest grossing MMOs as well. What started as an internal test of sorts became a very viable business strategy, and soon all Nexon games were utilizing the same free-to-play model. This carried on to about 2005-2006 when Nexon launched their American subsidiary, Nexon America. At this point, according to Wizit, the developer behind MapleStory, the game had earned over $300 million US, and over 1 million customers had bought an item from their cash shop, which was the method of purchasing these said in-game items. Cash shops would sell cosmetics, items, and other vanity items that were purchasable with either in-game currency or real-life currency, thus creating what most people know today as microtransactions. When Nexon brought their Korean MMOs over to the US, they had much of the same success using their same business model. Sure, to the outside looking in, these range of games might not have had the most people playing, but when compared to other juggernauts in the Western market, of course, their business model was less of a drop-off, as they didn't have to worry about a drop in subscriptions like other companies at the time had to. Say, for example, after the 1 to 2 months at launch, where usually subscription-based games would have this massive drop-off because the game, wasn't up to their standards or whatever else. Instead, free-to-play games had a steady influx of players, wanting to try out a free-to-play title, and then the ones who stayed, possibly paying for the cash shop items as well. There was very little risk for a player to try out a free-to-play game, especially when compared to another MMO that required a monthly subscription. People were tired of these subscription models and welcomed free-to-play games. Free-to-play games were the market's response to a dying subscription model. Sure, well-known devs in the US poo-pooed the idea of free-to-play, like Mark Jacobs, the man behind Dark Age of Camelot and Warhammer Online, but companies like Nexon and those who followed their footsteps realized that they were on the cusp of something revolutionary. The Western market was just going to be slow to change. But the market did eventually change in the Western world and came in an avalanche of change. One of the first highly publicized titles to make this switch to free-to-play was none other than Lord of the Rings Online.
You shall not pay!
Turbine Studios, the developer behind Lord of the Rings Online, announced that they were receiving triple the revenue after their change. Turbine wasted no time implementing this model with their other titles such as Dungeons & Dragons Online, which reported a 500% increase in revenue. Clearly, the free-to-play thing was more than just a fad, and many companies quickly followed suit. Age of Conan, EverQuest, City of Heroes, and later Star Wars The Old Republic all reaped in the positives of their business model change. However, the switch to free-to-play started to become a last hurrah for some games, a final lifeline for a failing game and company, which resulted in many titles making the switch and then inevitably failing in doing such, many of which I have already covered on my channel. Most of which didn't necessarily outright fail, but certainly failed to have the same success as the aforementioned titles. There were negative ramifications when free-to-play was introduced in the US, however. This came in the form of a few key MMOs that I have covered on this channel. Arcade and APB were the two big offenders, both offering bonuses to those who paid money, and both having massive incentives to pay. I won't go into too much detail concerning their business models, because you can check out my video on either game for more of a specific rundown on that. But just like with any proven business models, there can be negative aspects that are taken as well. Once companies like Tryon and others realized that they could make more money being free to play, they proceeded to nickel and dime you at every chance they could, to make their bottom line look that much more appealing. MMOs weren't the only game genre that were reaping the benefits of microtransactions though. Multiplayer games like Team Fortress, Battlefield Heroes, and Quake Live all too boasted success in their business model switch. As success started to pour in for all of these companies, other free-to-play titles flooded the market and unfortunately meant a lessening of the average quality of game for the time. I would say largely though, there were positives for the model, mainly for people who might not have had the resources to spend money on games, or for people that weren't willing to spend money unless they were already invested. But it's important to realize that there were negatives associated with the rise of free-to-play too, and arguably the best example for how crazy things took off was in the mobile market. A cell phone was first designed to be just that, a cellular version of a home phone, a portable phone. As technology advanced, phones were able to play in-house music, as well as different media such as videos, movies, and even video games. When video games started to become playable on your phone browser or even in an app store such as iTunes or Android, it was a game changer for the market as a whole. It all started with titles such as Candy Crush, Farmville, and then later on Clash of Kings and Madden NFL. The stats on screen are in a single day. Yes, that's the level of money we are talking here. Now, I lumped Farmville in with the other mobile games, though it technically was more of a browser game that was later moved to mobile. Farmville was able to take ideas from the aforementioned free-to-play MMOs and take it to the next extreme. The game was fairly accessible, just about everybody could play it, even old grandma and grandpa. The game was deceptively free, where it was possibly to play it free, but they always dangled that carrot in front of you and promised a higher crop yield and faster times if you just forked over a little bit of dough. Why is forked such a hard word for me to say? Forked. That's how it all starts. Having a customer pay a box price for a game is a lot to ask. You ask for trust up front, often before they've even had a chance to play the title. But a game like Farmville or Candy Crush, they simply have enough gameplay that's free to draw you in, and then they offer some cash shop items, so you think to yourself, well, I've already dumped a few hours into this, why not a few dollars of mine as well? It's an easier sell that way. We call that more of a, in sales terms, a warm sell versus a cold sell. A cold sell or cold call is selling or talking to somebody that you don't know at all, while a warm sell would be selling with somebody, or selling to somebody rather, that you've already had some sort of interaction with. The results clearly show, by the way. 4 years ago, Farmville was able to clear $1 billion in in-game revenue. And just 2 years ago, Activision Blizzard bought Candy Crush from developer King Digital for $5.9 billion. What started as a hobby market with a deceptive business model had become a juggernaut in gaming, being able to achieve numbers we never thought previously possible, especially not on a phone. Why has this business model proven so successful? Well, it's more than just the business model and the microtransactions that are successful. As this helpful infographic on screen points out, addictions target the brain reward system and flood it with dopamine. When we play, we feel happy. Since playing is now associated with the reward, our brains remember this action as something necessary to repeat in the future. Over time, a person can produce less and less dopamine with the activity, so the brain craves more time spent with the addiction. Because of the lower dopamine levels when not playing, withdrawal symptoms set in, including depression, restlessness, difficulty focusing, and mood swings and nausea.
You know, it's not fucking rocket science, this stuff.
Since games like Candy Crush force you to wait, the more time you can't play the game, the more you're willing to fork over more cash. And when you do play, it's casual in nature because it's easy enough to play with a single hand. The catch is, the game never really ends, and all along the way is effective at getting you to buy just one more upgrade or add-on. Just like the arcades I mentioned at the start of the video, just one more round of quarters. But in this case, we're dealing with a billion-dollar industry and highly addicting mobile titles. How different is this to gambling? The lines get really blurry, I'd say. Even more blurry when you consider that many of the people who play these games are children. In a study conducted by Microsoft, they found that out of 2,000 parents, 28% found out that their children had made in-app purchases without their knowledge. This of course sparked outrage, and Apple was forced to pay a settlement of $32.5 million in refunding in 2014 concerning children that were buying games and in-app purchases. The lawsuit was concerning the ease in which a child could purchase in-app purchases on the Apple Store. In a high-profile incident, an 8-year-old managed to rack up over $6,000 in app purchases. This led to Apple having to remove their free app title in favor of Git, which was a step towards not being as misleading. The transparency is certainly positive, as mobile games are far too accessible and easy to spend money in, but the companies have already made billions in dollars concerning mobile games, and with more mobile games on the horizon, and former titans like Clash of Clans and Farmville still racking in millions monthly, the market doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon.
You will regret the day you crossed Angry Eastern 52.
But microtransactions aren't just about free-to-play games and mobile games. Microtransactions over the years have continued to evolve. One of the more recent developments of this is what people refer to as loot boxes. A loot box is something you buy with in-game currency or real-life money that has a chance at rare gear or weapons, sometimes skins as well. There are minor examples in games such as Gears of War, Overwatch, and Halo 5. But the highest profile example of this are the cases in CSGO. Some of these cases require keys, which require real-life cash to buy. In many ways, it's gambling. Point blank. You pay money to see if you get a reward. Sure, you always get something as a reward, but most of these rewards are poor in quality, and often not really worth the money that you put in originally. So you more or less are hoping to get a rare gear drop in the loot box, which according to the dictionary definition, is pretty damn close to gambling. The way a company like Valve has been able to steer clear of being considered straight out gambling is that they're technically not giving you money directly, though you can sell the items you gain or win for money on a Steam store or on the Steam marketplace, so it's a bit of a loophole. This was actually really bad a couple of years ago when third-party gambling sites took the skins that you could win in CSGO and made it to where you could bet real-life money to have the potential to win a skin worth a lot of money. It skirted around the legality of what is considered gambling, but even though some people took Valve to court concerning the illegal gambling, the case was thrown out of court. There was still more scandals involving the case. There was the Team Martin and Pro Syndicate CSGO drama where they had been advertising to their YouTube channel to use their website, while not really owning up to the fact that the website was indeed theirs. It was a bit misleading, of course, especially when many people gambling and buying the CSGO cases in general were of course children, who are really the perfect target for this sort of e-gambling. The severity of e-gambling, and in the specific case of the CSGO cases, had gotten so bad that it was picked up by even mainstream news organizations like ESPN. ESPN told the story of a young kid who had essentially been turned into a compulsive gambler due to the gambling nature of CSGO, loot boxes, or cases, whatever you want to refer to them as. Even after all of that drama, the loot box market doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon, with juggernauts such as Blizzard Activision utilizing these in nearly all of their new titles, as well as Electronic Arts. Loot boxes prey upon the very instinct of a consumer. Who doesn't want to watch a roulette spin that 1 to 10% chance you could win a rare that you could brag to all your friends about or even show off in your next match? But microtransactions won't stop with loot boxes, which is bona fide e-gambling. As companies have started to realize, they can prey upon cash whales, who are individuals who have no qualms about cashing out to get ahead. They have become even more bold in their microtransactions, willing to see just how far they can push their audience to pay for things that they don't need. The best example of this was probably the infamous horse armor in Oblivion. It cost roughly $2 to $3 and was a cosmetic item for your horse. Nothing really more to it on the surface, except deep down it was an example that you could take a couple of minutes of coding cosmetic horse armor and sell it in a single player game like Oblivion for cash. Joel Burgess, the senior level designer at Bethesda, said of horse armor, "All those more interesting DLCs were built on the back of horse armor," said Burgess. While horse armor still gets trotted out as an example of bad DLC, it remains a point of pride for Burgess, according to the article. You know, there's something to be said for giving the internet something to be made fun of. You know you've made it, I guess. This response from Burgess really just highlights my point. It's no wonder that Oblivion and other titles more recently were able to continue to sell single items in a single player game for cash. It seems like the market would buy just about anything really, especially if they like the game. But some of the more terrible offenders of the curse of single player microtransactions have probably been Electronic Arts with their Dead Space title, and then the more recent Warner Brothers games with the whole Shadow of Mordor thing I mentioned at the very beginning of the video. Downward Thrust has talked about both of these in his microtransaction video, so check out that video for his breakdown. He talked about Dead Space and how it intentionally made the gameplay grindy in order to pressure you to buy XP boosts or better weapons, and Shadow of Mordor and how it's attempting to get you to buy items and loot boxes for its single player. Oh, and it's also going to have an online mode, in which this would also affect that. It's an absolute mess. But companies are continuing to get away with microtransactions, and not just any type of microtransactions, the negative ones, and not even particularly good ones at that. Of course, that's not to say that all companies who employ microtransactions are necessarily bad or implement them poorly. Say, for example, two extremely popular titles such as Path of Exile and League of Legends, well, really most MOBAs in general, offer fair business models, I would say. The thing with these two titles in particular that I mentioned is that they don't necessarily force you to buy things, and everything you can buy with the in-game currencies. It's just an expedited process for some, or really just cosmetic. Point being, they are a very fair business model, and very successful ones too, which proves you don't need to nickel and dime, mislead, or pressure your customers and audience to get them to pay money. Especially in the case of League of Legends, one of the most popular games worldwide. I made this video not so I can have people collectively around the world hold their pitchforks and try to put blame on certain companies, or just hate microtransactions period, but more so because I wanted people to understand what a microtransaction is, how it can be implemented poorly, the dangers of such implementation, and finally, why they were even created or implemented in the first place. I don't personally have an issue with microtransactions on the surface, when properly implemented of course, but the lines get a little bit blurry. It's quite easy to overstep these lines, especially when it comes to pressuring customers to buy things in a cash shop. That's all for me with this video though, folks, and hopefully after watching you guys have a better understanding of how microtransactions as a whole work. You can tune into my YouTube channel if you want to see more content like this, or you can also tune in if you want to see more of my Death of a Game videos, which are still going to be coming out. Thank you for making it to the end of this video, and that's all I have for you guys. nerdSlayer, out.